really interesting, folks, what people are admitting now. And, you know, Ezra Klein, who is one of the ones, he went on to Pod Save America, and he had some things to say to the Democratic Party about where they went wrong and to shut up, basically. He said, shut up. I was like, okay. So TYT, they're discussing this. And of course, Anna is very excited to hear this from Ezra, because she is using this as her way of saying, I told you I've been right all along. It's a long story, but maybe not really. Let's get into this. What does Anna have to say about the Democratic Party? Listen to this.
The thing that surprised me least about the election was the sharp red shift in these big cities. Because if you just talk to anybody who lives in them, they are furious. And this idea that like, oh no, the economy is actually good or crime is actually down, or this is all just Fox News, like shut the up with that.
Congratulations, everyone. Libs have caught on to something that we figured out 2 years ago. Crime is a problem. And if you just tell people, voters specifically, that it's not a problem and it was way worse in the 90s, so you shouldn't be complaining, there will be backlash. There will be blood, okay? And so here we are. Ezra Klein was on Pod Save America to reflect on the disastrous election cycle that we just experienced for the Democratic Party. And he touched on how poorly blue cities have been run by progressive leaders. Got to keep it real. And so here's more of his argument. Here's more of his revelations, and then we'll break it down further.
The sense of disorder rising, right? Not just crime, but homeless encampments, trash on the streets, people jumping turnstiles in subways, crazy people on the streets. You just talk to people and they're mad about it. They feel it's different than it used to be. I mean, in San Francisco, like the fury is overwhelming. And you see that it's not just the presidential level. London Breed, the SF mayor, just lost re-election. In Oakland, they recalled the mayor. A bunch of the progressive DAs across the country were recalled or beaten in re-election campaigns. If Eric Adams has a lot of problems, but if he were obviously on the ballot, he would almost certainly, it seems to me, lose. You have to be able to govern well. People don't follow politics, but they live in the place they live.
Yeah, I follow politics, and I also live in the place I live. And I've been furious for several years now. And everyone immediately, oh, Anna's just a secret right-winger. Anna's just a secret right-winger. No. I'm not a secret right-winger. I see the dysfunction, and I see working class Americans getting their catalytic converters stolen, okay, getting their homes broken into, getting assaulted on the subway or the train. And I'm supposed to just shut my mouth about it and tell everybody everything's fine because it's not the 90s? No.
Pause. Okay, so let's jump into this part of the conversation here. One of the things that I do want to point out about the crime issue, I think the difference is there's a difference between the data that says that discusses violent crime. If you look at the data that discusses violent crime, it shows that violent crime has gone down. But I think what Ezra and Anna are discussing is crime overall. So when you change that from violent crime to crime overall, obviously the numbers go in a different direction. Two, another thing I want to bring up, Anna has no room to talk about anybody calling her right wing when she did the same thing to people like me. She did this to like Jimmy Dore. She did this to a number of us that were not happy with the Democratic Party. And you guys know I supported Jill Stein. I voted for Jill Stein. So I voted third party. I hate the two-party system, right? So she was calling us right wing online, on Twitter, on TYT. Anybody who was not willing to go along with the progressives who had sold out or go along with the Democratic Party in the end, Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur sat right there on TYT and smeared us as right wing. So now that is happening to her, now it's just like, oh, whoa, just because I feel this way about one issue doesn't mean that I'm right wing. But Anna said this about other people. She said this about other people, that they were right wing for having those same feelings. Three, Anna and Cenk live in Los Angeles. And yes, obviously crime is an issue in Los Angeles, also San Francisco. But what I think people who live in California got to understand, the rest of the country is not California. Anna has to realize the rest of the country is not Los Angeles. The rest of the country is not San Francisco. So yes, you may have really high crime where you are in Los Angeles, but that doesn't mean it's the same across the country. They're right about the tent communities, which I've been warning you about for years. For years, I told you the tent communities were increasing, but that goes back to a poverty issue. So to me, if you come into me and you just saying that there's more crime, but you're not linking the crime back to poverty, then I'm asking, what is the agenda? Like, what are you really trying to accomplish? Anybody can look outside and say, hey, oh, look, there's more people out there on the street sleeping. Oh, God, no, the crime has gone up. Link the two together. Most crime is poverty driven. Not all of it, but most. So this is the other piece. Why aren't you connecting a lot of the crime to poverty? That was a bad place to pause that. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not gonna wait until after the election to talk about how it's a problem. I'm gonna talk about it well before the election. So, maybe Democrats, maybe progressives can recalibrate. But that's the thing about the left. They don't believe in recalibrating, okay? They think they know it all. They think they're the best. They think that anyone who crosses them or tweaks them or critiques them is the bad guy.
You thought that too. Like, I'm so confused. All of a sudden, Anna has this epiphany as if she never did these same things to other people. Anna Kasparian, honey, you said the same thing. You said the same thing, that no one could tell you anything, that you knew everything. This is just crazy to me.
And congratulations, in the state of California, Donald Trump flipped 10 blue counties into red counties. Let's take a look at the map. This is the electoral map. First one on the left-hand side, of course, is from 2020. And then, would you look at that? One of the most liberal parts of the country has become increasingly red. I wonder why that happened.
California is also expensive as hell. It's ranked number one when we talked about the housing costs in this country. Remember, we were talking about that cost of living report that I cover each year. California's number one. You need to make I think it's $42 and some change an hour to have a 2-bedroom rental in California, a modest 2-bedroom rental in California. Okay, so, but again, as I said this before, California is not the rest of the country. And that's the West Coast thing. On the East Coast, I hear a number of people will say, well, in New York is like this, New York is like that. When I lived in New York, everything was New York. New York is this, New York is that. But I say the same thing to New Yorkers. You have to realize that everybody else on the East Coast is not New York City. Every other city on the East Coast is not New York. So just because it's happening in New York doesn't mean it's happening all up and down the East Coast. Just because it's happening in California, Anna, doesn't mean it's happening all along the West Coast. Now, California is a big state and it takes up a good portion of the coast. But I want people to understand that, two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that when we look at overall crime, that has increased. When we look at violent crime, that has decreased. But it can also be true that Anna and Ezra, they are looking at the crime in the areas that they live in, and they are applying it to the rest of the country, where there are places in the country where they're not seeing these spikes in crime. So we have to think about that. Two things can be true at the same time.
Okay, in New York, last time Biden won, but Trump lost by 24. This time he only lost by 12. Remember, he was talking about how he's going to win New York, and of course he wasn't going to win New York, and that was outrageous. But what he was getting at is, I'm going to do a lot better than you expect, and he did. Except there was one show that expected it, and it was us. And so, look, I think that our advantage is that we're not bullied by the media gaslighting industrial complex. And so there's two different factors here. So there's the extreme left, identitarian left, whatever we're calling them these days, right? So those guys say, no, crime is imaginary, it doesn't affect anyone, it's blah, 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 right? And I'm like, look, guys, first of all, look at the stats. The stats are clear. In fact, I was on Hassan's show, my nephew, and he pulled up the stats as we were doing the debate on it, and the stats showed that I was right. So there's no question about it. And then you go talk to real people. Can you guys please, everybody overused the term touch grass, but go talk to non-political people. So I go to a picnic or a barbecue or whatever it is, and as soon as I got non-political people, I immediately ask them what they're thinking. And in California and New York and San Francisco and Philly and Washington, the first thing that would come out of their mouth is, I hate the crime. The crime's out of control. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that, etc. And and then I asked them, what do you think about Biden? This is now 2 years ago, a year ago, etc. And they're like, obviously too old. What are they doing? It's crazy, right? So, but when we would tell both the identitarian left and the corporate Democrats, you guys are crazy. Biden's way too old and crime is real and people are really pissed about it. They're like, no, that doesn't suit our purposes.
Let me pause. I don't remember anyone saying that crime is imaginary. I don't remember anyone saying that regardless of political ideology. If you have, let me know. 2, crime has always been higher in the bigger cities. DC, Philly, LA, New York. That's always been the case as long as I can remember. But 2, again, if you're just talking about crime and you're not discussing the cause, that gives me a side eye. I give you a side eye because the reality is, why is it increased so much? Remember, we had the pandemic, 2 years ago now? 2 years ago. No, 2020, height of the pandemic, right? So there are a lot of businesses closed. A lot of people lost their jobs. If you lived in a state that was locked down, like my state of Massachusetts, a lot of people lost their jobs. That leads to poverty. Poverty can lead to crime. And I'm not making excuses for the crime. But what I'm saying is make the connection. What happened over the past 4 years? Going back to 2020, the pandemic. So you are going to, when you see increase in poverty, you see increase in crime. So we got to make that connection.
That's not in our ideology. We reject it out of hand. Well, if you keep rejecting facts, well, this is where you're going to wind up.
100%.
So, all right, I'll get to Ezra Klein in a second.
So I want to go to a segment featuring Harry Enton because, they did their post-election analysis and they noticed a trend when it came to, the blue parts, like the bluest parts of the country and what they have noticed following the 2024 presidential election. So let's take a look at that.
Donald Trump put up the best Republican performance for a Republican nominee for president in at least 20 years, if not the entire 21st century. We're talking about Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, San Francisco.
Before we get to the crime issue, there's something else all those cities have in common, which Anna and Jink don't want to mention. Chicago, LA, New York City, and San Francisco also were sanctuary cities. Keep that in mind. I think that's important to add to that conversation. Let's continue.
Across the map, Donald Trump put up historically strong numbers for Republican candidate for president in places that, truthfully, if you had asked me 8 years ago, I would have never thought possible.
No, I mean, it is really stunning. So what exactly is driving it?
What's driving it? I think immigration, one of the things you mentioned earlier on in that last segment, is part of it, but I think crime is a big part of it as well.
Yep.
If you look at Gallup polling, you ask Democrats nationwide, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with our efforts to control and bring down the crime rate? What you see is the dissatisfaction number now versus a decade ago. Look at that. The unsatisfied number from 35% to 58%. The satisfied number dropped by 20 points.
That's okay.
But those cities, again, I talked about this a year ago. In those cities, residents were complaining about immigration. They were complaining about the migrant crisis. They were complaining about the crime. I saw in local New York news show. Someone sent this to me. Apparently in Queens and some part in Queens, I think it's Roosevelt Avenue. This is on a local news that a brothel has been set up in broad daylight. Like they literally had women, I assume they're Venezuelan women who were just like, quickie, like broad daylight. They showed there's children walking to school in Queens off of Roosevelt Avenue. I'm not kidding. But when I told people about these things, I brought people on the show to talk about what was happening in New York, what was happening in right over here in Boston when they kicked people out of the rec center. And they said, no, we're going to put the migrants here. There was just a representative from Massachusetts who was on the news that said, I encourage Massachusetts residents to open their arms and their doors to migrants who have come in. What? So this is what I was trying to tell you guys. Make the connection. Now, does that mean that everyone who came here is doing that? No, it doesn't. But all those cities have the crime, increase in crime that he showed you. And all those cities also were sanctuary cities, and they had an increase in migrant population as well. So you got to put two and two together. People didn't like it when I said it, but I was trying to tell you what the people, black people in black neighborhoods were complaining. They said why are they getting free housing? Why are you giving them a debit card? Why are you just like this? Eric Adams, I would argue, probably wouldn't have been under investigation if he would have kept his head down and not spoken out publicly about the migrant issue in New York City and criticized the Biden administration. Next thing you know, he's under investigation. So we got to put two and two together. Even Eric Adams, who was the mayor of New York City, even he was complaining. He said, we don't have the resources. We can't keep this up. So put both of those together.
Hey, just go to them and tell them everything's fine. Crime isn't as bad as it was in the 90s. That's not politics, okay? That's not trying to win. That's digging your heels in and insisting that you're right, even as there's widespread concern over these issues. Look, the main role of government is to protect its citizens. And in these situations, in these blue cities, when the public doesn't feel that Democratic leadership is doing enough to protect working class people, okay, they're not going to favor the Democrats. And as they're being gaslit, they're just going to increasingly get angry. How do I know that? Because I've experienced it firsthand myself.
Okay, so here's something else I want to say to add to this, because the reality is this. People are going to ask this question. Okay, so at the end of the day, who are we better off with? Are we better off with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party? Anna's going to give a response to that. But I would say, even when you look at the votes, and I looked at the data, the fact that Donald Trump increased votes in New York City, we're talking about, again, these are districts that were blue. Some of these people voted for Donald Trump because of immigration issue, because of immigration. Just solely because of immigration. Now, a lot of people are going to assume, oh, it was white people who did that. Really? All of them? Are you sure? Because there's been a number of Latino Americans that I have heard from that also wanted to support Donald Trump because of the immigration issue. There were black voters that supported Donald Trump because of the immigration issue. And when you brought this up, people are just like, how dare you talk about that? You're right wing. And I'm like, no, I'm just saying, like, these are legitimate concerns of people in the community, and they have a right to voice that concern, which they tried to do with their local officials, and the local officials kind of just wanted to brush it off. Now you see the results of that after the presidential election. So the question that people are asking, whether it's crime, whether it's immigration, is who are you better off under? Listen to what Anna says. This is interesting.
Can you please adjust? Both the establishment Democrats and the identitarian left would come and yell at us as if we were the enemy and we were trying to help Trump win and we were hurting the Democratic Party, when we were honestly almost the only ones who were trying to help so that we could beat Trump.
Yeah, well, I'm done with that. And so I'm not for either party, and I'm gonna do my job and my analysis, and I wanna make it very clear to people watching.
You were for Kamala Harris, son. I'm not for either party. You were for Kamala Harris, and you were shitting on those of us that wanted to support third party.
Watching the show, do not expect me to be an activist for any side, because at this point, that's a losing strategy, especially with the Democrats who just refuse to take any advice, refuse to adjust, refuse to recalibrate. And honestly, when I look at which party has made my life worse, and it's because local politics has more of an impact on your day-to-day life, it's the Democrats. And they need to accept that and change. And if they don't, well, they're gonna keep losing support, even in cities like Los Angeles and even in states like California.
So Anna Kasparian says that the Democrats have made her life worse. I don't know how everyone else feels about this, but I think we're looking at this the wrong way. And I think we're looking at it though, like, I think she's given the wrong response. It's not about whether it was the Republicans that made your life worse or the Democrats that made your life worse, because both of those parties are corporate. Both of those parties are owned by the billionaire class. So who's really making your life worse are billionaires. That's who's making everyone's life worse except for their own. And of course, their family members as well. If you look at this from an MCDS perspective, one of the things Eric points out, he said, an MCDS analysis of TYT tantrums. First, the MC. They're acting like Democrats are actually trying to win when it's really just theater to distract the peasants. Meanwhile, the billionaires rob us blind with impunity. Eric goes on to say, asking why are Democrats so bad is the wrong question. The right question is, why is the Uniparty so bad? And the answer is, as with all political why questions, is the same: big money and corruption. So that's the M and the C, money and corruption. Let me go back here. Eric goes on to say here, you can talk about the demands as well. 7 more demands and solutions at 11 demands: money, corruption, demands, and solutions. And then this part here. And now the demands, the DS part, demand solutions. We need better Democrats is the demand the corporate establishment wants us to make. Demands they don't want us to make is to fix big money in politics and government, in the wars, real health care for all, a minimum standard of living for everyone. So does everybody see this, the difference? Like, this is what, especially corporate media, they think they want you to believe that the solution is just to elect different Democrats. I'm speaking Democrats because, you know, this is where a lot of us came from, was the Democratic Party. But that's not the solution. The solution is to get big money out of politics and government. The different politicians, they're just puppets. They're puppets for the billionaires. They're puppets for Elon Musk. They're puppets for Larry Fink. They're puppets for Jeff Bezos. That's it. As I've shown you before, they are not at the top of the pyramid. The billionaires are at the top of the pyramid. Everyone's got to get this and fully get it. So when Anna Kasparian makes this argument that who made my life worse, the Democrat or the Republicans, even though she says she's not for either party at this point, what Anna Kasparian is doing is that she's still keeping you in the duopoly, because she's still telling you that one is better than the other. So she's still keeping you in the two-party system. And as long as both of those parties are controlled by the billionaire class, neither one of them is really better for you. That's what I want people to really understand. Get big money out of electoral politics. Then you can talk about whether or not one of these parties is better for the people. If you really want to see how these parties are going to fight for the people, you got to get big money out of electoral politics. And you'll see how much they claim to care about you and see how that works out. What a mess, folks. What a mess. Let's go to Sebastian said, who paid Anna. Yeah, it's just when you say, I'm not for either one of these parties, but then you say, but this is the one that you may not be for either one of those parties, but you're still keeping the viewers there. So it's just, come on. We know what TYT is doing. Come on, right? I told you what I thought they were going to do before. One more thing I want to add to this clip, because I don't want to forget to add this. TYT is doing what I predicted they would do a couple of months ago. I think that TYT is trying to go in the same direction as Breaking Points, where they're going to have one person on the show that has more of a left perspective and another person on the show that has more of a, she ain't got there yet, but more of a right-leaning perspective. Now she says, you know, she's not right-wing, she's, you know, independent, but I think they're doing this also for views. Because the reality is, I showed you the numbers. Breaking Points has less subscribers than TYT does, but Breaking Points gets more views. So I think TYT, this is their way of kind of shaking things up and still have the two main hosts, but have them have different perspectives. And that way they can gain a bigger and a more diverse audience. That's what I think is happening there. I don't know. I just try to think outside the box sometimes, and I just don't think that everyone is acting in good faith. Sometimes I feel like there might be some type of a strategy to this. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.